So let me ask you a question. Can the government actually be held legally responsible if the police failed to protect you? It is a question that cuts right to the core of our relationship with the state, doesn't it? When you're in danger, you absolutely expect the authorities to step in. But what happens when they know about a threat, have the power to stop it, and just do nothing? Do you have the right to hold them accountable, or are they just shielded by bureaucratic immunity? Welcome to this explainer. I am so glad you're here today because we are unpacking a truly landmark legal battle from the Constitutional Court of South Africa. It's the case of Alix Jean Carmichele versus the Minister of Safety and Security. Now, this isn't just your standard true crime story. It is a profound constitutional law analysis that literally reshaped how an entire nation views the duty of its police and prosecutors. Okay, let's dive right in and look at the tragic events that set this whole thing in motion. Section 1. A vicious, preventable attack. To really grasp the monumental legal shift this case caused, we've got to start with the harrowing facts of the assault itself. Picture this. It's August 6, 1995, in a quiet, isolated coastal village called Nowetsi, just outside of Knysna. Alix Jean Carmichele heads over to a friend's house, expecting to meet up with her buddy, Julie Gosling. But instead, she is confronted by an intruder. The guy's name was Francois Coezi, and he had broken into the home. What followed was an absolute nightmare. The sheer brutality of this completely unprovoked attack is terrifying. Coezi didn't just break in. He immediately went after Alix with a pick handle, raining down violent blows on her head and face. When she threw up her arm to protect herself, he fractured the bone. Then he tossed the pick handle and actually lunged at her with a knife. He stabbed her in the chest so incredibly hard that the blade literally buckled against her breastbone. Miraculously, and I mean miraculously, she managed to kick him off balance, scramble out a door, and run down the beach for help. But here is the thing. The chilling context surrounding this assault is what makes this entire explainer so vital. The terrifying truth is that Francois Coezi should never have been on the street that day. Not at all. The authorities knew exactly who he was, and they knew exactly what he was capable of doing. Which brings us to Section 2, ignoring the red flags. When you look at the historical timeline, it illustrates this cascade of missed opportunities by the state that is just going to shock you. Coezi's escalating crimes were like a glaring, blaring warning siren. In June 1994, he was convicted of indecent assault after climbing into a woman's bedroom, but he only got a suspended sentence. Then, less than a year later, in March 1995, he brutally attacks a 17-year-old school friend, who the records just refer to as E. He dragged her into tall grass, punched, kicked, and throttled her until she passed out. And yet, in April 1995, when he appeared before a magistrate, he was released unconditionally on his own recognizance. Just a few months later, he attacked Carmichele. So you might be thinking the authorities were just in the dark, right? Actually, no. After attacking A, Coezi actually went to a hotel, asked them to call the police, and admitted he thought he had killed a girl. He later explicitly told the senior prosecutor, Diane Lau, that he literally couldn't control his sexual impulses when he saw girls. He claimed this superhuman, unnatural force just overtook him. He even attempted suicide while out on bail, which prompted a 30-day psychiatric observation at Valkenburg Hospital, where they found him legally competent to stand trial. The investigating officer, Detective Sergeant Klein, and the prosecutors had all of this deeply disturbing information sitting right in front of them, and still, they didn't oppose his release. And it wasn't just the suspect telling on himself. The locals were practically begging the authorities to do something. People in the community, including Alix's friend Julie Gosling, explicitly went to the police and to prosecutor Diane Lau. They warned them, loud and clear, that Coezi was going to hurt someone again. The response? Authorities threw their hands up, claimed there was no law to protect them, and said their hands were tied unless he committed a brand new offense. This bureaucratic apathy completely set the stage for tragedy. All right, Section 3, the fight for accountability. So after surviving this horrific ordeal, Alix didn't just walk away. No, she decided to hold the entire system accountable by filing a civil lawsuit against the ministers of police and justice. To understand her lawsuit, we need to quickly define a legal concept that's at the very heart of this explainer. Her claim was founded in delict. In South African law, a delict is essentially a civil wrong, kind of like a tort in other parts of the world. It's an act, or in this specific case, a failure to act, that causes damage or injury, and it allows the victim to sue for financial compensation. Now, to win a delict claim against the state, it's like a three-step ladder Carmichele had to climb. First, she had to establish that the police and prosecutors actually owed her a specific legal duty to protect her. Second, she had to prove they negligently breached that duty. And third, she had to show a direct causal connection between their negligence and the devastating injuries she suffered. The whole shebang completely hinged on that very first step. Did the state actually have a legal duty to act? Unfortunately, her initial fight hit a massive brick wall right out of the gate, resulting in something called absolution from the instance. I know, it's clunky legal jargon, but basically it means the judge looks at the plaintiff's evidence and decides it is so legally weak that the defense doesn't even need to bother presenting their side. The case is just tossed out right then and there. And yeah, that is exactly what went down in the High Court, and it was later affirmed by the Supreme Court of Appeal. The lower courts dismissed Carmichele's case entirely. Relying on these really outdated, pre-constitutional common law precedents, they ruled that the police and prosecutors owed no specific legal duty to protect her from coercy. They looked at the state's failure as just a mere omission that didn't trigger liability. It was an absolutely devastating blow for accountability. Section 4. The Constitutional Shift. But Carmichele, she did not give up. She took this fight all the way to the newly formed Constitutional Court, triggering this massive clash between two totally distinct legal eras. See, the lower courts had relied on the pre-1997 common law, which was heavily influenced by English law, and it favored this immunity approach. The old-school mindset was that if you let citizens sue the police for failing to stop crime, well, it would just drain state resources and make the police way too defensive. But the Constitutional Court stepped in and said, wait a minute, we have a new constitution now. And that constitution mandates a positive duty on the state. It doesn't just ask the government to nicely refrain from harming citizens, it actively commands the state to respect, protect, promote, and fulfill the rights of its people. The Constitutional Court deeply understood the gravity of what was at stake here. Quoting an amicus brief from the Center for Applied Legal Studies, the court noted something really powerful. Sexual violence and the threat of sexual violence goes to the core of women's subordination in society. It is the single greatest threat to the self-determination of South African women. They recognize that handing out blanket immunity to police who just ignore violent threats effectively abandons vulnerable populations, especially women facing gender-based violence. They pointed right at the Bill of Rights. The state is constitutionally bound to uphold the right to life, the right to dignity, and the right to freedom and security of the person. The Constitutional Court firmly stated that the lower courts had completely failed their obligation under Section 39(2) of the Constitution. That section requires all courts to develop the common law so that it matches the spirit of the Bill of Rights. Because think about it. You cannot have a constitution that guarantees the right to security while simultaneously keeping a common law that says the police have zero duty to keep you safe from a known confessed violent offender. It just doesn't work. Section 5. A landmark legal precedent. So, how does this incredible legal battle ultimately wrap up? Well, in a unanimous and sweeping judgment, the Constitutional Court overturned the rulings of the High Court and the Supreme Court of Appeal. They categorically stated that a public interest immunity, one that excuses police and prosecutors from liability in these kinds of circumstances, is completely inconsistent with the values of the Constitution. The court threw out the absolution and sent the case back to trial, finally forcing the state to answer for its deadly negligence. This decision was a total game changer. It established vital, concrete takeaways for the entire justice system. The old excuses? Gone. From this point forward, prosecutors are explicitly required to protect the public interest and ensure that all relevant criminal history, like Coetzee's past attacks and his psychiatric profile, is presented during bail hearings. Police officers cannot just make casual recommendations for release while sitting on glaring evidence of a suspect's violent compulsions. The ruling clearly recognized that while an accused individual liberty is important, it absolutely must be meticulously balanced against society's fundamental right to protection. At the end of the day, what you really need to take away from this is how a devastating, entirely preventable tragedy forced a legal system to literally evolve. The Carmichele case firmly established that the law has to prioritize human life and dignity over bureaucratic convenience and state immunity. The government has to be an active shield for the vulnerable, not just a passive bystander watching from the sidelines. Which brings us to a final provocative thought to leave you with. Thanks to Alix Jean Carmichele's incredible bravery, we know the state has a duty to protect us from known imminent threats. But as we navigate a really complex world, where exactly do we draw the line between our own personal safety and the limits of state responsibility? It's a huge question that every democracy has to continuously answer. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will see you next time.